Hey guys, I'm back. Please excuse my fan, the bright light it's emitting. I'm scooting back a bit so it's not glaring on my face. Much better. So recently I've decided to start reading books to you guys. The first one I've picked is this one called The Eyes of the Dragon. As you can see, it's by Stephen King. Maybe you've heard of him? But it's not like his usual stuff. It's fantasy. I ordered it on Amazon because I thought it sounded really interesting. Because I love fantasy novels. It's like my favorite genre, fantasy. Now, this book is pretty thick, so I'm not going to read it all in one sitting. I'm going to split this up into little parts, but I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to stop because I haven't read like any at all. I've read a little bit, but not much. So, I'm going to start now. Once in a kingdom called Delain, there was a king with 2 sons. Delain was a very old kingdom, and it had had hundreds of kings, perhaps even thousands. When time goes on long enough, not even historians can remember everything. Roland the Good was neither the best nor the worst king to ever rule the land. He tried very hard not to do great evil and mostly succeeded. He also tried very hard to do great works, but unfortunately, he didn't succeed so well at that. The result was a very mediocre king. He doubted if he would be remembered long after he was dead. And his death might come at any time now, because he had grown old and his heart was failing. Perhaps he had 1 year left. Perhaps 3. Everyone who knew him, and everyone who observed his grey face and shaking hands when he held court, agreed that in 5 years, at the very most, a new king would be crowned in the great plaza at the foot of the Needle. And it would only be 5 years with God's grace. So everyone in the kingdom, from the richest baron to the most foppishly dressed courtier, to the poorest serf and his ragged wife, thought and talked about the king in waiting, Roland's elder son, Peter. One man thought and planned and brooded on something else, how to make sure that Roland's younger son, Thomas, should be crowned king instead. This man was Flag, the king's magician. Although Roland the king was old, he admitted to 70 years, but was surely older than that. His sons were young. He had been allowed to marry late because he had met no woman who pleased his fancy, and because his mother, the Dowager Queen of Delain, had seemed immortal to Roland and everyone else, and that included her. She had ruled the kingdom for almost 50 years when, one day at tea, she put a freshly cut lemon in her mouth to ease a troublesome cough that had been plaguing her for a week or better. At that particular tea time, a juggler had been performing for the amusement of the Dowager Queen and her court. He was juggling 5 cunningly made crystal balls. Just as the queen put the slice of lemon into her mouth, the juggler dropped one of the glass spheres. It shattered on the tiled floor of the great east courtroom with a loud report. The Dowager Queen gasped at the sound. When she gasped, she put the lemon down her throat and choked to death very quickly. 4 days later, the coronation of Roland was held in the Plaza of the Needle. The juggler did not see it. He had been beheaded on the executioner's block behind the Needle 3 days before that. A king without heirs makes everybody nervous, especially when the king is 50 and balding. It was thus in Roland's best interest to marry soon, and to make an heir soon. His close adviser, Flag, made Roland very aware of this. He also pointed out that at 50, the years left to him in which he could hope to create a child in a woman's belly were only a few. Flag advised him to take a wife soon, and never mind for a lady of noble birth who would take his fancy. If such a lady had not come into view by the time a man was 50, Flag pointed out, she probably never would. Roland saw the wisdom of this and agreed, never knowing that Flag, with his lank hair and white face that was almost always hidden behind a hood, understood his deepest secret. that he had never met the woman of his fancy because he had really never fancied women at all. Women worried him, and he had never fancied the act that put babies in the bellies of women. That act worried him too. That was a little immature. Sorry. But he saw the wisdom of the magician's advice, and 6 months after the Dowager Queen's funeral, there was a much happier event in the kingdom. The marriage of King Roland to Sasha, who would become the mother of Peter and Thomas. Roland was neither loved nor hated in Delane. Sasha, however, was loved by all. When she died giving birth to the second son, the kingdom was plunged into darkest mourning that lasted a year and a day. She had been one of 6 women Flagg had suggested to his king as possible brides. Roland had known none of these women, who were all similar in birth and station. They were all of noble blood, but none of royal blood. All were meek and pleasant and quiet. Flagg suggested no one who might take his place as the mouth closest to the king's ear. Roland chose Sasha because she seemed the quietest and meekest of the half-dozen, and the least likely to frighten him, and so they were wed. Sasha of the West Barony, a very small barony indeed, was then 17 years old, 33 years younger than her husband. She had never seen a man with his drawers off before her wedding night. When on that occasion she observed his flaccid... Okay, I'm stopping now.